Here, read this.
Woof.
So I was reading an interview in The Guardian this morning with author Maggie Nelson, who in a few days' time is bringing out a book-length essay called The Slicks, which is a comparative study of Sylvia Plath and Taylor Swift. I've always been a bit nonplussed by this comparison. It's been around for years now, and I've never really seen what there is in common between the two, other than coming from the same continent. On the face of it, they seem like drastically different artists. Plath, a poet of fierce, vivid imagery, poems that come out as refined, perfectly compressed as a pearl, and then Taylor Swift, whose music, I have to admit, I haven't deliberately listened to much, but what I have heard under duress has always struck me as being like the musical equivalent of cottage cheese. The article reports that the notion of uniting these two cultural titans, one a melancholic American poet and the other, well, a billionaire, first came to Maggie Nelson whilst listening to the Tortured Poets Department. Isn't that a bit like saying the notion of first uniting Maroon 5 and the Rolling Stones first occurred to me when I heard them say they've got the moves like Jagger? Like when I first heard them heavily signal that that's how they'd like to be thought of, that's when it first occurred to me to think of them that way. Now, I fully intend to read The Slicks when it comes out on November the 13th. I'll make some kind of video response or review once I've done so. So this is more like a preview, I suppose. The article doesn't give much away, doesn't go into detail about what Maggie Nelson sees in common between Plath and Swift, but very broadly, she compares their feminism, their ambition, and the two of them as lyricists. I mean, that's the one I'm most interested to hear her argue, but we'll come to that in a sec. Let's start with the feminism side of things. Even here, I don't really see a commonality. I mean, Plath was stridently individualistic. That's what turned her into a feminist icon. But what it also means is that she would never dream of going in for the feminist bumper stickerisms that are Swift's speciality. And on the feminist point, I also suspect that for you to see a similarity between Taylor Swift and Sylvia Plath, you have to see Plath as the patriarch reduced her to, a kind of disfigured doll of Plath, a tortured poet girly who just wrote poems about how she gets dumped a lot. And then the second similarity touched on in the article is that both Swift and Plath, in Maggie Nelson's view, shared a common ambition, an ambition that held strong in the face of oppression. On the face of it, that doesn't seem like much of a strong resemblance, or any more of a resemblance than coming from the same continent, since that is something that would affect all women. But surely there is no resemblance whatsoever with the kind of ambition Plath had, and the kind of ambition Swift had. On one hand, Plath never got a chance to enjoy the fruits of her work and her ambition, and on the other hand, Taylor Swift is a billionaire. I think it's absurd to imagine Plath becoming, more marketing than person in the way that Swift is. And I don't really know what we're supposed to be celebrating when we look at Taylor Swift's wealth and what she does with it. I mean, if someone in the face of patriarchal oppression set up a fast food giant to rival McDonald's and called it Slop Queen, would we be really cool with that? Don't think about the slop bit. Don't think about the implications of the slop on your bowels or the environment. Just focus on the Queen. And finally, Maggie Nelson hints in the article that she'll be looking at the lyrical similarities between Plath and Swift. This is the bit I'm most interested in. Again, the article doesn't give much away. All she says, this is in regards to Swift, is she has songwriting moving through her. So we're not getting much from that. The reason this one jumps out as the most interesting is that the biggest gulf between Swift and Plath, fairly obviously, seems to be quality of writing. I think the reason people need to focus on a distorted public image of Plath, the bobblehead tortured poet girly, is that it would be catastrophic for this comparison to focus on what Plath actually wrote. To do so would be confronted by Plath's relentless effort to improve, her dissatisfaction with her own writing, compared over on the Swift side of the ledger with songs constructed out of memes, wall insulation, and botched references to Shakespeare, coming from someone who calls herself your English teacher. Above all, they might notice that Taylor Swift, rather than resembling Lady Lazarus, much more closely resembles the peanut-crunching crowd, whose bland output matches their bland appetites. So I am guardedly looking forward to reading this. I'm looking forward to seeing those 3 points argued, in particular that third one. But that's all on this until November the 13th when the slicks come out. Until then, happy reading.